All right, so if the last video left you a little unsettled about how to deal with this negative when we're looking at bases and whether it's part of a base or not, let's take a step back and maybe see if this will also explain how we know whether this negative should be included in the base or not, okay? So we're gonna come back to this in just a second, but what I wanna go through is looking at something without an exponent at all. So instead of negative 2 to the fourth, let's instead back up a second and just look at what negative 2 is. Let's just look at what the nature of negative 2 really means, what its implications are. All right, so could I rewrite negative 2, I'm going to rewrite it in a way that's equal to negative 2, okay? I am going to say that negative 2 is equal to negative 1 times a positive 2. This is a true statement, okay? So remember what we said before in terms of coefficients? Okay, so why don't we think of negative 1 here as a coefficient for a second? All right, I'm going to write coefficient, and if you are unfamiliar with what coefficient is, we went over some of the vocabulary in a prior video. So let's think of negative 1 as a coefficient, all right? So let's go back to this negative 2 to the fourth power now for a second. Okay, do you see that using this method of looking at this problem, that I could say this is like equivalent to having a coefficient of negative 1 times 2 to the fourth. Do you see that this negative 1 is not under the auspices of this 4? It's not under the influence of this exponent of a 4. And I sort of broke it down even further here to really emphasize the fact that this negative is not under the influence of this 4 whatsoever. It's really on the outside completely. And we can throw this negative in at the end once we evaluate what 2 to the fourth is. However, this negative is not swept up in our calculations when we're applying that exponent of a 4 here, okay? So what if we wanted to evaluate this? Well, this would look like it's negative 1, and then here, this is 2 expanded out, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. All right? So 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, okay? So this is negative 1, so I'm just following this down to this, and then multiplying that times 16. So that equals a negative 16, meaning that negative 2 to the fourth without any parentheses is equal to a negative 16. All right? So if we had a parentheses around this negative 2, then we would have multiplied negative 2 times itself 4 times, and we would have come out with a positive 16. So hopefully that's a way that you could think about it as, well, this negative out here is almost like a coefficient to this 2. So that might help you in terms of determining whether you want that negative to be part of the base or not.